Welcome, everybody. This is the Regular People podcast where we interview amazing people who just, in a lot of ways live regular lives, but they're still superheroes in a lot of people's eyes. They might just not know it. Today, I'm here with Erica Battle, and I think she is a special person, not because she's just beautiful, not because she just carries a really interesting spirit with her, but because one of the main things that she focuses on in her career and in her advocacy is childhood literacy and just really championing, am I saying that right? Championing for the youth. And I think that is just something that I'm extremely passionate about. And it's good to just kind of, brush shoulders with somebody who kind of has the same passion too. So super excited to have you on today.
Well, thank you.
Yes. Before I jump into it, this podcast is sponsored by nobody. So eventually one day somebody's going to care enough to sponsor this, but just, hey, be watching. We coming up. Okay. Anyway, there's a question that I want to ask you before we jump into the nitty gritty. And it's, how do you think that childhood trauma affects the way that a child goes about gaining literacy skills?
Honestly, it's not just about how they gain literacy skills. It's about how they learn.
Yep.
So we can't just separate or isolate literacy skills out thinking about learning as a whole. And I want you to think about it. So I had posted something on my LinkedIn not too long ago, and getting adults to think about how certain events will affect us either in a positive way or a negative way. And the example I used was, you're getting ready to walk out the door. You got your coffee in your hand. You got your briefcase in one hand. You trip, you stumble, you spill coffee all over you. What do? You stop. You got to go change clothes. It disrupts your entire day. And you have the option to carry that all day, or talk yourself out and, hey, things happen. Or I keep it like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I messed up. It threw off my day. And that affects how I interact with everyone. We have to realize that children are not always that resilient because they have not always learned those skills. One thing that social media and the internet has highlighted is the events, the traumatic events, the amount of trauma that our students, that our youth, we don't even have to necessarily say students, but that children experience. And when they experience these traumas, and no one has taken the opportunity to show them how to recognize certain emotions, how to be able to express how they're feeling about those emotions, to be able to compartmentalize where those emotions should go. What do? I carry them.
Right.
I carry them out my door. I carry them in the classroom. So if I'm thinking about, when we talk about traumas, a lot of times we're talking about homelessness. We're talking about physical abuse. We're talking about sexual abuse. We're talking about emotional abuse. We're talking about being hungry. We're talking about a lot of aspects that can happen to our children. And if I'm 8, I don't know what to do with the emotions that I feel seeing my mom or something happen in my family that's traumatic. And then you want me to come to school the very next day like nothing has happened and be a learner. And no one has addressed what I'm going through emotionally.
Right. So, I mean, I have a lot of similar feelings because number one, I was in education. I was a teacher for about 8 years.
Okay.
And I think you're spot on when you talk about just how whatever happens outside of the classroom oftentimes comes into the classroom. What is your experience with this particular problem? Like, how have you been affected by this or so moved to cause you to become an advocate for this cause?
So here's the thing. People just automatically assume, and I'm talking in general, that educators have had a great experience with education, and that's why they're so passionate about education. I'm the opposite. All right. So I had a fantastic, educational experience up until 6th grade.
Yeah.
In 7th grade, things shifted. Number one, my parents were going through a divorce. And although I was in the 7th grade, it was still my parents. The divorce was necessary. It wasn't a divorce that was not, as kids, we don't always see those things, right? As adults, looking back on what was going on in your home, you can process it completely different than you can at 12. So my parents were going through a divorce. With a divorce comes the change in household income. So when my parents were together, my father was a high earner. So when they divorced, it changed our economic status and all the things. And although my mom did an amazing job being able to keep our home and all the things, there was some disruption of how I was raised as from 7th grade on. Well, because of that, and I did not know what to do with how I was feeling. 7th grade was rough for me. And it was almost as if my teachers and my principal just chalked it up to adolescence, puberty, and defiance. It was never a question of, okay, this student up until 7th grade was straight A, number one, straight A, highest, always in the 90th percentile in standardized testing.
Come on now.
Do you see what I'm saying? Always. And then I get to 7th grade and can barely hold a D. No one asked, okay, what happened from 6th to 7th grade? Like, those things just don't happen. And puberty is in defiance and being in, even though 7th grade is the hardest grade.
That is, hey, and I was a middle school teacher, so.
Me too. Okay, so my first grade was 7th grade, so I know we crazy.
Woo.
But I also, at the same time, I still had things going on. And then not only outside the home, but then inside the home, inside schools with, friendship groups changing, cliques started, like all these issues. And so because of what started in the 7th grade, I didn't graduate high school on time. I did graduate. I didn't get my GED. I actually got my high school diploma. And I say not on time, but I didn't graduate at the end of May with my classmates who I had been in school with for years. I didn't graduate until September because I had to go to night school to get a couple of credits that I didn't finish in school. But it wasn't because of ability. And that's the issue. It had nothing to do with ability. It had everything to do what was going on outside of my home and not allowing me the opportunity to be a learner in school because I was dealing with other things. So when I started teaching my 7th grade kids who were crazy, nuts. Do you hear me?
Yeah,
these 7th graders were nuts.
I know it.
I say all the time, I'm not in a sorority or anything, but those 7th graders hazed me for about 8 weeks.
Yep. Hey, I taught 8th grade. So the 8th grade they felt like they were trying to be like the big head, the seniors, of middle school, but even still, like just the behavior and the attitudes, they were so sporadic. Like one day you're my friend and the next day it's who are you? And I'm like, okay, well, all right, whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, keep on. I'm sorry.
So no, you're right. Because that's the truth. So I encountered these 7th graders. And I always say that I never intended to teach because I did not. I actually went into public relations. I actually wanted to be a broadcast journalist. Like I could see myself.
Yeah, I can see you too.
Being a broadcast journalist.
You got it. Yes.
Let's talk about it. But then I interned in the newsroom and was like, absolutely not. I'm not having a stroke to be on TV. Because the newsrooms, atmosphere can be a little thick because, it is a very competitive field. So that just didn't match well with me. And so I went into public relations, lost my job because of cuts and was like, okay, what do I do next? So I just started substitute teaching initially, just until my next. And long story short, I was in a vacant position that was very hard to fill. And after about about 4 or 5 weeks, the principal was like, listen, you're the only sub that has stayed beyond a week. If I can get you an emergency permit, will you stay the year?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, sure. And so what I realized was, first of all, my students were not unintelligent. So they were not, it wasn't, but no one had never impressed upon them the importance of their education. And, once I got to know them even more, they were telling me how people used to tell them they were dumb and they wouldn't. I mean, these are kids. And so before they get to me in the 7th grade, they're like young kids. But, they would be like, people would tell us we were dumb. Our other teachers told us we wasn't going to do nothing. And so guess what? Kids will rise to your expectation.
Yeah.
100%. If you call them dumb, guess what? Okay, well, I'm going to be dumb. You call me bad, guess what? Okay, I'm gonna be bad, right? Yeah. I can show you, but I can tell you,
right?
But if you, you give them some expectations, and even though I was a substitute transitioning, I had a kid that was in the 7th grade, and so my mindset, even as a substitute teacher, was if a person decided to take this position full time, and my child was in that class, what do I want them to do? I want them to teach my kid. Yeah. Now, it was not easy. Okay, let me tell you, it was not easy. Okay, it was not easy. And so, I'm not real proud of this moment, but it was a necessary moment because I remember having to shut my door. One day, come to school, shut my door. I brought my college degree and my high school diploma because I had a point to make to these students. And I let them know, listen, you are not hurting me because guess what? My paycheck does not change if you don't learn, but you are hurting yourself. I don't need 7th grade ever again. I don't need it. And maybe I wasn't that nice about it, but I needed them to hear me.
Sometimes you got to hit them. You have to hit them with that truth. And to what you said about like bringing in your degrees, I did something similar myself. I came with my when I got my master's degree, I came in with my my Memphis University graduation outfit or whatever, and I was letting the students wear it. I was letting them to just so they could see like, okay, there's more to this than just what it is, and they were kind of cheering me on. But I think you bring up a really good point when you say rising to the occasion. The kids are going to they're going to rise to whatever the expectation is for their home. And I'll tell you this quick story. When I was subbing, I was a substitute teacher. I was teaching at, it's right up the street too.
Belshire?
No, I was teaching at a high school. It was Maplewood.
Oh,
it was
okay.
Maplewood. Okay. I was teaching at Maplewood, and I was being a substitute teacher, and it gets kind of crazy as a substitute. But I had a really good handle on things. I loved dealing with classroom management, and I was really young at the time. I was like 22. And the kids, when they came by and saw that I was in the room, they didn't come in. And, there were like 3 of them who came in who sit down and, read a book. But the rest of them were like, I ain't going to this class. I ain't going. The next thing I know, and this is early in the morning, all of the students came running into the class, and the principal was right behind them, Dr. Woodard. Sorry, my bad. Dr. Woodard.
Dr. Woodard.
Yeah. And I messaged him a while back. And I was like, dude, you showed me something that I really appreciated. So he came in and he's like he's not scolding the kids, but he hits them with this line. He says, look at what you look like, talking to some of the boys who they had their pants like down, like they weren't even on at this point. And he was like, look what you think of yourself. And then he hit him with this line. He says, you know what I see when I see young boys walking around like this, in this way, not wanting to go to class, not wanting to, dress like they have self-respect. He said, I see low expectation. And I was like, dog, I don't know. I've never heard that in my life. And it was such a simple phrase, but it stuck with me. I mean, this was 10 years ago. But it stuck with me so long because a lot of times we, as teachers, we look at the students and we say, you got to care about this. But if these kids don't have mentors, don't have parents, don't have some sort of community behind them that's pushing, this idea of education and then going to school, they don't just pick that up. It's not a want, you know. And I think that was one of the biggest issues that I saw. Just low expectation.
So think about it though. If I come from poverty, okay, my mom is. I'm gonna use this example. If me and my family, we live in public housing, but my aunt lives in public housing, my grandmother lives in public housing. I have generations of my family in the same public housing community. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with public housing, okay? But if that is all I see, why do I need education? Because what has education done for my family thus far?
Right.
All of us are in this low income community. And that's where my expectation lies. You know, I worked in, so I've worked all over the country, but I remember specifically, I work in Norfolk, Virginia. Norfolk, Virginia, 25 minutes from Virginia Beach. Okay. The beach, the actual beach. I was at a middle school one day and it amazed me how many kids have grown up in Norfolk, Virginia, but had never been to the beach.
Wow.
And the bus goes to the beach. You could hop on the city bus and drive to the beach. So these kids did not have a view outside of their community. Here is the thing. What's interesting about your story, about you bringing your gown in, is at the end of the year, I did the exact same thing. But I took it a step further. Right before spring break, I brought my high school diploma in, I brought my degree, and I brought my cap and gown in. I took pictures of my students in these, and I gave them a choice. You can take a picture with my degree or my diploma, whichever one, what you want to do. And so while they were gone for spring break, this is how long ago it was. While they were gone for spring break, when they came back, I had plastered all of their pictures in this cap and gown above their lockers. And me and one of my teammates, I mean, it took us a minute because it was like 100 kids at that time. But we said, welcome back, class of 2013. To all the kids. It didn't matter if they were in, you know, the exceptional ed program. It did not matter. If you were a 7th grader, you got a picture. And, you know, I did this with my own money. You should have seen their faces. They were like, oh my gosh, that's me. There's my picture. Because some of them were going to be first generation high school graduates.
Right.
Some of them were going to be first generation college graduates. And although they, in their mind, were like, well, I'm going to do this. When they saw that picture, it was like, oh my gosh, took it a step further.
Yeah.
At the end of the year, you know how we give end of the year awards and, you know, you get best, you know, most attendance, this, you know, you give about 5 or 6 awards.
Sure.
I decided to do something different. I had my students because it was the end of the year. So it was like, how do I, you know, pass the time? I took that, the pictures a step further. I didn't just leave them there on the top of their lockers. And so what I did, because the end of the school year was ending, you know, you always trying to find something to keep your kids engaged in the process after standardized testing. So I gave this assignment called History or Her Story. The purpose of that was, because I taught reading, ELA, was for them to write an essay. I didn't care what they were going to do after the 7th grade or the 8th grade. I had them tell me, what is it that you want to do once you graduate high school? So they wrote this essay. What I did was I took the essay, I mounted it on construction paper. I took their picture that I took in their cap and gown, mounted it on the opposite side, laminated it, and gave that as my award at the end of the year to all of my students. And as I gave it to them, I made up some little oath about how they would accomplish these things. And at the end of that, all of my kids looked at me, because they were my kids. By the end of the year, they were my babies. They looked at me and was like, Miss Battle, you really loved us. And they just hugged me and they were crying and they were like, you loved us. You really did love us. Well, I still keep in touch with those kids.
Mhm.
I just went to lunch with one of them maybe about 3 weeks ago. She doesn't even live here. She lives in Houston and she was in town. She reached out and was like, Miss Battle, I'm in town. I got my daughter. Let's go to lunch. So
That says a lot. That says so much.
She's grown with a daughter, flew in town and called and was like, let's do lunch. I want to do lunch. I also have a book that's releasing, and I know we'll talk about that later. And the first thing she said was, can you please, if you do a book launch, can you just give me enough time so I can, make my way back in town so I can come support you?
Mm.
Now, this is a student, student that I taught years ago. And what I realized is I cared so much because when I was in the 7th grade and going through my stuff, I still get emotional because I realized I didn't have teachers who kind of looked beyond the behavior to get to the root of what was going on. Yep. And that's what I was able to do. Because again, I was a substitute teacher learning to teach, but I was still a person understanding that 7th grade is a tricky time in a person's life. Mm-hmm. And once I was able to get to the root of a lot of my students' behaviors, that's when the relationship shifted. My students began to trust me and they decided to be learners. Yep. They would do their homework and be like, Miss Battle, I did your homework. I said, oh, and I had started school the second half of the year so I could continue teaching. I'd be like, oh, you wrote my paper? And they were like, no, but I did my homework. Oh, you did your homework. So I would mess with them. But what they were saying was, I did it for you. Yeah, I did my work for you. And although I was learning to teach, my kids still increased by 10% from the year prior. Right. And a lot of it had to do with they wanted to make me proud. They wanted to work for me. Mm-hmm.
And first of all, that's an awesome story. And I think I'm just going to be real on this one. I think when people hear stories like this, they assume that every teacher does this. And I think when people hear or see like the protests and stuff like that, when teachers are just kind of like, okay, I do this in the classroom. I should get this. Though I agree with a lot of, the wants and I think there needs to be a lot more conversation about, teacher pay and stuff like that. When it comes to like checking off all those boxes, like I've seen teachers say, or like teachers make little posts on social media saying, I'm a counselor, I'm a parent, I'm a friend, I'm this. Me personally, I've only come across maybe 5 teachers in my entire 8-year career as a teacher who can say that is them. Yeah. And I count myself as one of them, not boasting, but the schools that I've been at, I've always stood out because I'm not just going to come in and give out a sheet of paper and then expect the kid to do it. And like you, and I hadn't even looked at this, but kids used to say the same thing, like, I did your work, and they come and try to mess with me. And I'm like, why do you say, I didn't really think about it like that, but a lot of times they were performing for me. Mm-hmm. And I always held really high standards. A lot of students like notes. I keep notes in my wallet. I have like 3 notes in my wallet right now, just from students who I've been with over the years who, I've gotten a chance to experience and they experienced me. One of the notes is like, I didn't like you at first because you always seemed stuck up and you always had, it really what it was is I had high expectations. Right. Like, don't come in my classroom being loud. Like, I don't like that. Like, we're going to come in a respectable way. This is a professional environment, whether or not you know it. And those students performed for me, and I think that's a good start. But, and then as you start to go, I'm like, look, you got to perform for yourself because I'm not going to be with you, next year. Right. You're going to have a whole nother teacher who might not even pay 2 minutes of attention to you on a given day. And there is a lot of burnout in there, from that, from giving all of that energy to the students because you have a life, you have a child. I have 2 children, I have a wife, so for me to carry that on for a number of years is very, very, very difficult, which is why I would say that most teachers don't do that. And that's the reason why you stood out so much because, man, it's like I felt like I didn't even have to do much to stand out at my school. All I had to do was, hey, what's up, man? How you doing? And give them some attention beyond just handing them a sheet of paper. So first of all, I commend you for that. And I think what teachers should strive to be and what we need to focus more on is teachers who are willing to give that kind of attention to these students, because, a lot of times some of the skills they should be learning at home, they're not getting. So when they come to class, that's when we got to kind of step up. So, I appreciate that, first of all. But moving forward, I think seeing how literacy plays a part in the classroom is very prevalent right now. Just throw out some statistics. Right now, there's about 1/3 of the United States in general who are reading at or reading below the basic level. And then we go to like proficiency or just being able to do the normal level. That's probably another, probably 30% in total of all of our students, and it's like, that is a horrible number. And this is not a recent thing.
No.
This has been, since this data was reported, it's been consistent. With the 8th graders, it's a little bit higher. I think it's like, the percentage is a little lower, like 25%. 1 in 4 kids can't read at a basic level. And then even further, it's like adults as well struggle with reading. You just don't really realize it. What does that look like in the classroom when a child has these interactions with teachers and they're supposed to be building this relationship, but there's a huge gap in literacy?
Well, it's sad, number one. So I taught reading my entire career. So a little background. After that, I wound up staying in education, and but I became a reading teacher. And the thing of it is I'm a winner. So I want to be the best regardless. Yeah. And so although I was not a trained reading teacher.
Flies getting you.
Is that with the fly sitting on?
Yeah.
And although I was not a trained reading teacher, I was very intentional of learning we now call it the science of reading, but all the components of what makes a really good, proficient reader. Because again, I was not a trained reading teacher. I'm leaving public relations, coming to education. So one thing that really helped me was I had an amazing literacy coach my foundational years as a teacher. And that is so important. I think we forget that when we put new teachers in a classroom, they need to really get a really good foundation of not only the fundamentals of building a relationship, but also pedagogy.
Yeah.
And I get it. We are having to just do all of these waivers. But anyway, another story for another day.
Yep.
But I did get a really good reading teacher. A literacy coach. And what I began to find out is, number one, I'm a disciplinarian. So my kids would tell you that I am the strictest, coolest teacher they knew, which basically meant I'm good until you're not. So when you do the foolishness, I'm with you. Yeah. But if you are working within expectations, we're good. Like my kids used to hate when other kids would call me mean. So they're like, she's really not mean. But I do have expectations. So I'm like you, I did have expectations. And what I would find is when my students could not read or they just were not strong academically, behavior is how they escaped not having to do the academic task, but the behaviors were there because they didn't trust the teacher in front of them to not, number one, scold them, and not number one, and the number two is help them. And so even in middle school, I still had kids coming to me in 5th and 6th grade reading on the 2nd grade reading level. And what I found is people were just passing them through because that was easier than taking the time to intentionally address the fundamental gaps that they had. And our literacy rates are going to get worse if we don't stop to realize there are some fundamentals that we have to address, even in high school, and we have to figure out how to make time to address them, right? Because you'll always have kids that, you'll always have classrooms where you'll have kids that are on level, above level, and then kids that are struggling. The trick is balancing. And again, I say balancing because it's not easy. Balancing teaching your core content, addressing the gaps of students, and still making sure that your students who are exceeding, they're also receiving what they need. Sure. Right. And so one of the things that I found is, number one, all of my kids had the expectation that we were going to learn. I'm sorry, you're going to learn. Right. Number two, I had to put some things in place and some tools and strategies in place so my kids could learn. It's one thing to give a child an expectation, but it's another thing not giving them what they need to meet the expectation and think they're just going to meet it. So as a teacher, it was some things that I had to intentionally do to make sure that my students could meet those expectations, right? I had to intentionally pull them in small group and address certain gaps through, during the class period. I had to intentionally differentiate how they learned the skill, but also ensuring that they were learning that same skill on their grade level and encountering grade level academic vocabulary and content. Because guess what? You might be testing on a second grade level right this moment, but at the end of the year, you're going to test on a 5th, 6th grade, 7th grade assessment. I would be doing you a disservice if I still didn't introduce you to what you're going to see in the future while trying to bridge those skills. Now, is it easy? Of course not. Right. Does it take an intentional effort and some balance? Yes. Can ed tech take away all the deficits and gaps? No. And I think that honestly, I really feel like, and I'm not saying ed tech is not necessary, because it is, but I think because we see our kids on their phones and their tablets, that we automatically assume that if we put them on an ed tech program, they're going to like it just as much. Yeah. Absolutely not. Okay. iReady, or, I don't want to just call out programs, but these programs are not the same as a social media app where I'm doing something for entertainment. Right. And I have the option to fully engage in this program or let it play and wander off and then just take the test at the end. Yeah. And so we have to recognize that we have to, and again, I say this and I don't take this lightly, is we do have to put some skin in the game, and we have to be very intentional teaching our students and addressing these gaps while still making sure that they engage in their grade level content. Because if I don't see the vocabulary that I'm going to be assessed in, if my texts are not as complex as they need to be, then of course my reading skills are going to decline. The older I get, the more uninterested in education I become. And then that's when we start talking about high school dropouts. And then that's when we start talking about generational poverty and all of those things. So it becomes this domino effect if we don't stop and take some intentional measures of addressing these gaps.
Now, in terms of addressing the gaps, do you think this is like, whose responsibility is that? And I think this is where there's a lot of, I don't want to say.
What do you mean? Okay, so when you say whose responsibility, because it should be everyone's, from parents on down, right? Yeah. If I'm a parent and my child is a struggling learner, I don't care how upset you get. No, the phone is going off, the tablet is going down, and we're gonna do the traditional thing of reading a book. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's and that's the problem. We're too busy trying to pin this issue on one group of stakeholders when it should be everyone, from the parents, community, the school leadership, districts, everyone. But we have to do this holistically. Like, we cannot say that one group of stakeholders is more responsible than another. True. Kids are at home with their parents, but guess what? They're in school for 180 days, 6 hours a day. That's a lot of time that I'm spending in school, as well as that I'm spending at home. Then some go to the community center. So it's not one group's, it's not just on one group.
Sure.
So parents can't say, oh, well, that's the teacher's responsibility and I have no parts.
And, I think that is what I hear the most, like whether it's on social media or, in a YouTube video, I hear a lot of parents who are concerned with how the schools are. And then even as a teacher, and then I'm trying not to tell too much about myself, but let's just say when I was a teacher, a lot of the parents struggled with the idea that, okay, just because your kid is in my class, it does not mean that they're going to grow in reading. There are so many things that are going to be competing against that kid's ability to, jump from a 20% score on a reading exam to a 60% score on a reading exam. On one end, I think teachers struggle with that because they feel like it's really top heavy, whereas all the direction is coming from directors who are not in the building, who don't see where the students are, but they kind of have an understanding of where the students are. They're like, we need to see this jump. And then the principals do the same thing. The teachers oftentimes are kind of like, depending on what kind of teacher you talk to, they might be nonchalant or they may be really, really focused and dedicated to trying to fix that gap. But then parents oftentimes are just oblivious. They are the ones that I've
a little
talked
disconnected.
to.
Maybe.
They seem really disconnected with how much responsibility they have, or how much, or the ability to take accountability for reading also at home. And me, I was a reading teacher as well. I was an English teacher as well. And I love English. Students hated English, but I loved making it fun. It was a lot of flexibility. So if you want to teach, I think you should try English because you can fit any subject in there.
You can.
But one of the things that I've even tried to implement just in my own life with my kids is from the beginning, before they were out of my wife's body, like I was reading to them. You know what I'm saying? So me and my wife both were like, look, our kids are going to be readers, because we hear about the from school to prison pipeline, and I've heard that so many times that it's become cliche, but it is a real thing because 70% of the inmates in prison do not read above a fourth grade reading level. And hearing that, it's like, some parents don't know how to make the connection. Well, basically what it's saying is if your child is struggling with reading, that increases the likelihood that your son or daughter is in line to end up in the social justices or the justice system in some kind of way.
Yeah.
So it's like, let's go ahead and X that off of the to-do list. And let's say, look, read something to your kids. Find some way to introduce reading. And I've done that with my son and my daughter from the beginning. And man, they are excellent readers. They love reading. And it's little small things that we do now also of course I have an advantage because I'm an educator and I teach reading specifically, but things like we leave books in our car when we're out, if we go out to eat or something like that. My kids do not use iPads
That's good.
We do not promote that because not that we want our kids to be meddling in all of the conversations that go on, which is, sometimes that's something that does happen, but you just got to add more positivity to your conversations. But we want our kids to understand context. We want them to understand language. We want them to understand communication
as a whole.
And it's like, dude, it's like these little small things, small tweaks that we can make to our lives, to increase the likelihood that our kids are going to be able to read.
So I say holistically, it's everyone's responsibility, but we have to also understand that in certain circumstances and situations, our parents don't read well. Our parents are not educated in a way that they can help their child in a way that would be beneficial. They don't know where to start. So when we start talking about it's everyone's responsibility, it's even the responsibility of the community to give the parents the support that they need so they can be confident. We have to also remember that not every parent has had a great experience, in education as well. So if I am a parent and my education was subpar, Okay.
Yeah.
I already am looking at you as a school teacher, like, really? What you doing? Because see, guess what I'm pulling from? So this is not this is a multi-layered conversation because it's not as simple as we want it to be because there are so many factors that factor into this conversation from, it's different. You're a reading teacher. So you know the importance of not even just necessarily reading, but also conversation, because there's an article that was written in the ASCD Educational Leadership magazine called "Talk is Literacy." Our students being able to communicate well. You know, if you look at the gap in even vocabulary with children that are in poverty versus children who are not considered in poverty, maybe middle class, 2-parent households where parents are talking to them, are reading stories to them, the vocabulary that they have by the time they get the age of 5 versus children who are not read to talk to is hundreds of thousands of words. So reading and literacy go beyond just being able to sit and read the words on a page and being able to understand them. It plays into a bunch of areas in our lives: communication, empathy. We learn how to empathize with others a lot of times through stories that we encounter, through conversations that we have. And so I don't, so when I say holistically, it's still everyone's responsibility. Even if I'm a parent and I can't facilitate those things at home, how do I reach out to the community to get the support to be able to help my kid at home? But then at the same time, as a community, how are we being empathetic and supportive where parents don't feel like they're being judged, where they don't feel like, I don't want to be accountable, but I do. I go back to Ben Carson's mom. It was Ben Carson's mom when she couldn't read, but her kids did. I think it was wasn't it his story? Am I making that up?
I don't know.
I'm almost thinking it was his story. I'm going to have to look it up. Okay, we're going to fact check that, okay? All right, just know it was somebody famous. And they did a story on his life where his mom could not read, right? But her kids didn't know it until they were much older. And what she would do is make them read, do a report. She couldn't read the report, but she would say, "That's not good enough." And she would throw it away and make them redo it. And she did this for like years and years and years until finally they realized like their mom couldn't read. But what she instilled in them, because she knew how her not being able to read hindered her, she made it a point to know that, you know what, my kids are going to be readers and this is what's going to propel them forward. Well, not every parent has that, because guess what? I got to make sure my kids are eating. If I can't read well, guess what? I probably have an hourly job that I cannot miss, because if I miss work, then I miss hours, then I miss income. And so again, we're talking about things that are a domino effect, but it goes back to getting to a place where we address what our students need as it relates to feeling safe. Are they fed? Do they feel like they belong? See, I can't learn when I'm questioning, am I safe in this classroom? Does my teacher even want me here? Am I going to eat when I get home? When I have all of these other thoughts, it's like Charlie Brown, want.
And what you're saying reminds me of a TED talk that I watched. You did a TED talk. Yeah?
I did.
Goodness, I see. Because I'm running out of time. But I was watching one, and I was watching Rita Pearson, and man, dude. She said something. She said a lot of what you're saying, and it was just so impactful. But I'm interested in hearing about your book. Okay. I'm interested in hearing about, what went behind you creating that book, and what are you hoping to get from I
started consulting with another book that it's funny. We were before you were saying that you would be like, "Who are you?" And so I have a book, a SEL program for middle and high school students called "Who Are You?" And I call it a journey. right? So this book actually is what propelled me into the world of consulting and working with schools. And my publisher, Solution Tree, reached out to me and was like, hey, have you ever thought about writing a professional resource for educators around SEL? And it has always been my heart's desire. So God knows your heart's desire. I had not said it out loud. So this was truly God granting a desire that he knew would make an impact, right? And so I used to do a keynote, and I still do. I do a keynote for schools called Act for Impact. And impact stands for practices that are intentional, practices that are meaningful, practical, authentic, consistent, and allows you to work as a team. And so I took that framework and created a book, created a professional resource for educators. And when I was writing the book, initially it was, it was really a blank slate. But the more we started writing, it was a really practical guide to help teachers build impactful relationships, to foster classroom environments where students feel seen, heard, and valued. And the name of the book is called The Trusted Teacher. And, it was funny because I didn't get to name the book because, my publisher did. That's their part. And when they gave me the title, they told me the title like on a Friday. Hey, this is the title that we've settled on, The Trusted Teacher. I really had to just think about it because it was so far off of what I was thinking. So the foundation of really what was the true foundation in my classroom, the foundation really was trust. When I think about all the stories, like I have so many stories of students reaching out and asking me to tutor their children. Like we know, and the basis is, well, I know you're not going to play with them and I know they're going to learn with you.
Yeah.
Really what that said is, Miss Battle, I trust you. And my book is how do we build that trust? Because I think teachers make the assumption that because they're the teacher on the first day of school, the kids trust them. My book is geared towards middle and high school students, middle and high school teachers, because they really don't trust you. Like they're trying to size you up. It takes a minute and we forget that it is everyday little interactions that really is the foundation of trust. And so my book follows this framework of impact of, practices, like I said, that are intentional, meaningful, practical, authentic, consistent, and allows you to work as a team. But what's special is you don't have to read this book from cover to cover. Like if it's the beginning of the school year and your team of teachers are trying to figure out, well, how do we address certain things as a team? Go to the teamwork chapter. It has reflection questions. It has resources and activities, but strategies that allow you to get together as a team before we start talking about what are some consistent structures that we're going to put in place. No, we got to get ourselves together as a team first. See, collectively, because I talk about collective teacher efficacy, collectively, if we are addressing the needs of our students as a team, then they know they have a team of teachers that they can trust. They know that practices are consistent and we're thinking the exact same way about our students. We can do so much more than trying to isolate ourselves and you do one thing, I do this thing. And no, how can we work collectively with the same students that we see every day? And so that is really the basis of the book. It is based on the foundation of trust in every relationship. I don't care who it is and who you're in relationship with. The foundation of your relationship with that person is a foundation of trust.
Wow. So before we kind of close out, I did have a question about the book. Is it more of a professional development type book that, would be something that schools could invest in and hopefully create, more understanding around some of the topics that you talked about?
Yes. So I've already had districts purchase the book and order books for a lot of this year was ordering the book for new teachers to giving them even though it's in pre-order, they'll, I don't know when this air, but it releases October. It starts to be ship out in October of 2024. I just throw that out there.
Okay. I got you.
If you listen to this next year, yes, the book is out. But I already had districts pre-order the book during the pre-order phase and allow me to come in and work with their new teachers on the foundation of trust. Because one of the things that I tell new teachers all the time, your relationship with your students is your classroom management on the secondary level. If there is no relationship, chaos will ensue.
Goodness.
But your kids have to trust that the relationship that you're building with them is authentic.
Right.
And that once they trust you, classroom management, that's a breeze because your students now trust you. So yes, schools can order it, districts can order it, because it's not just a tool valuable for new teachers. Some veteran teachers need to know what it looks like. Just like you said, not every teacher is truly invested and it can be for a variety of reasons. And so if we want to change the environment in our schools and in our classrooms, it starts with us.
Yeah.
It starts with us.
Oh, goodness. That's wonderful. That's crazy. First of all, I'm super honored just to have you on before everything starts to blow up and everything just starts getting all successfully for you and everyone's buying your book. I wanted to hurry up and grab an interview with you on my little podcast, but I appreciate you so much. Yeah. This is see. But I really appreciate just having that dialogue, because I think there needs to be more dialogues. There needs to be more open forum about, what's going on in our schools, and then also how our teachers can better affect change within the classroom. And then, of course, you just keep going out to the districts and all of that. Extremely important stuff. Thank you guys for checking us out on the Regular People podcast. Please find Erica Battle. Book her. You keynote, right?
I do keynote.
Hey, come on. You have any socials that we can follow you on?
Yeah, so very easy. All of my social media handles are the Erica Battle.
The Erica Battle. Hey, find her, book her quick before her schedule fills up. Thank you guys for watching the show, and please make sure to come back. Hopefully you learned something this episode, and who knows, maybe you'll learn something in the next. Anyway, peace. Have an awesome day. Read to your kids. Find somebody to read to. You should be reading yourself. Later. Thanks, guys.